Welcome to Sustainable Packaging with Cory Connors. I'd like to introduce my good friend, Miss Jennifer Carlsson. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing today?
Good. You're joining us all the way from Stockholm, Sweden,
Yeah,
and you are the beauty brand specialist for Mintoro company.
Minto Iro.
Minto Iro. I apologize.
It
So,
means green color in like mint green color in Japanese.
oh, I love that. Is that a name that you came up with, or is it a
It's
company that you
a
started?
it's a name I come up with, and I started the company myself in October last year, so I'm quite new. I used to be like a fashion blogger, like alternative fashion, where the online handle was Minty Frills. So I always had something with mint and mint color, and like I'm doing design, and yeah, so it also
It's
it was available for the URL.
That's a beautiful name. I really like that. I'm fascinated by the Japanese culture. They're very innovative in their designs, so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I love.
tell us how you got into sustainable packaging. I'm fascinated to hear your background.
Yeah, for sure. So before I started my business, I actually hadn't been working for some years because I was dealing with health issues for several years. I couldn't work. And when I was starting to get better, I was trying to think of what can I do? Because like what can I do for a living that will make sense and that will be something that's sustainable on a personal level, like something that I can continue to do and that I will enjoy and that just works. So I decided, okay, like a year from now, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to start a business, and I'm going to do design, very unclear, but something with design. So I started learning and just on my own, learning more about design, learning more about business and everything, and working towards that. And when it got closer, I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I actually doing? Who is actually my target audience? Because I'm making websites, because everybody needs websites, but also thousands and thousands and millions of people do websites.
Right.
So I looked at the kind of design I like to do and the style of that, and looked at, okay, what commercial work is there out there that looks like the kind of work that I am good at and that I like to do. And I made like a mood board and just collected a bunch of images. And what I got was confectionery or cosmetics. And I'm more interested in cosmetics.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. That makes a lot of sense. I've heard of mood boards, and that's a really cool way to make a decision. I like that.
Yeah. And looking back, it's like for years, even years back, whenever I go into any kind of shopping mall, I always go and look at cosmetics products, and I just look at the packaging. I'm not even shopping for products.
Right.
My phone is filled with pictures of packaging, like just looking closely at it. Oh, they did this. Oh, look at this cool thing they did. And like I've just been fascinated with it for a very long time. So it just makes a lot of sense looking backwards. It's so obvious. Yeah.
Sounds like you shop like me. My wife won't even take me shopping anymore because I spend all the time looking at the displays and the packaging.
Yeah. It can
So,
take up a lot of time when you're
oh,
out.
it's overwhelming for most. They're like confused by what we're so excited about, but we
Yeah,
live and
definitely.
breathe this. So this is a question I'm asking all my guests, and I'm excited to hear your opinion. Can packaging be sustainable?
I do believe so, but my biggest takeaway is that we need to move away from using so much plastics. I think plastics is a huge issue, and I don't think recycling is going to be a solution to that. And it's something that we really have to grapple with, I think, and figure out other options for as much as we can. And for the times where plastics really is the best solution, then also be mindful of kind of how we use it. Where does the plastic come from, and trying to use recycle the plastic that is out there. So but yeah, there are so many other materials, and there's lots of innovation going on with different options. And I mean, for cosmetics, I really like glass and aluminum. I really like paper packaging where it's applicable. So I think there's a lot of options where we can kind of innovate and find different solutions.
I agree. It's really exciting to see the new trends and the new ways people are using aluminum and glass and even wood and bamboo and all these alternative materials that are more sustainable when used correctly. I agree. And
Definitely. And with the thing of being used correctly, it's like, yes, using bamboo, but not to cover a plastic jar.
right. Yes, that is so true. Well, and you've chosen probably, in my opinion, the most difficult field to be sustainable in, the beauty field. Cosmetics and beauty products are notoriously bad for the environment. So I was so excited to have you on the show to explain how those things can be made sustainable. Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Yeah, for sure. One of the first issues people bring up with using different, more sustainable materials is that some formulations can be that the product itself is very sensitive to what packaging it can actually be stored in. But I think that, glass is often good for a lot of things. So I feel like there's not actually a lot of excuse. It's more of an excuse, right? I think a big part of why the cosmetics industry overall is so unsustainable has to do with the big corporations and many of the different stakeholders that are invested in these corporations also are very invested in fossil fuels. And the reason they're using so much plastic, reason they're not going to stop using so much plastic and doing the things that they're doing is because they don't want to. And I actually believe that that is like a big part of the problem when you have people who are invested in the fossil fuel industry also invested in the industry because plastics is made out of fossil fuels. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that. And I think that's a big issue. So the things that we can do to be more sustainable within the beauty industry, I think that you have to really actually put it into consideration when you're formulating your product and with how your product itself is designed. Because design isn't just the packaging, you design an experience for the customer. Yes. So a really cool thing that I'm seeing is more and more solid product like bar soap and solid conditioner and that kind of thing, which opens up for way more options for packaging because often you can just have a paper box.
Absolutely agree with that. And I've been using bar soap my whole life, and to find out that a sustainable alternative was kind of something I had to think through. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You don't need a plastic bottle or a plastic jar or anything like that. So yeah, I like this new trend of concentrates and solid, items. That's a really cool trend. So thank you for that. That's smart.
Yeah, and another thing too there with the concentrates is that there's a lot of brands that do that do powdered products that you then just mix with water on your own. And that also opens up for way more options and you're not using water in the production. So there is a lot of innovation, and I hope to move more towards that, and otherwise using, instead of a plastic tube, you can use an aluminum tube instead of these heavy acrylic thick kind of luxury packaging, a really nice glass bottle instead, right? Because it feels nicer too. But yet there are so many of these luxury brands that of course are owned by the corporations that have these really heavy acrylic bottles.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's a challenge to get them to consider alternatives, but I think we're going to start seeing it really soon if you're not already. More and more it's coming. People are demanding it, and the consumers need to continue to vote with their dollars and say, hey, this is not what we want. We want something like this. I like that.
Yeah, and I think more than just voting with your dollars, I think, not having subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, which is part of why plastic is so cheap, is also a big part in it, because companies make choice. If plastic is more expensive, then less companies are going to choose plastic.
Yep.
And, that's just a fact. But I think a lot of the innovation comes from independent businesses. And I think supporting independent businesses is also a really good way to not put more money in the hands of these corporations and signaling to them that we're not going to accept what you're doing now. So I think that's also important.
It has come to my attention recently that some of the larger companies that recently took a lot of heat for their footprint, if you will, their carbon footprint, have made some aggressive plans for the future towards sustainability, including agreeing to sign on for extended producer responsibility, which I thought was really good. So I think we're going to see some positive change in that realm, I hope.
Yeah, we're all hoping, but soon we're gonna have to do more than just hope. I think another issue of the pledges of what people of different corporations are doing is that, like, having more responsibility for what happens later. I think that's good, but a lot of the big corporations, you see them talk about this carbon neutral and carbon footprint and carbon compensating, which is like, I think a good explanation of the carbon compensating and the issue of it is that it's kind of like cheating on your wife, and then you pay someone else to not cheat on their wife. You don't know that they were going to. You don't know that they
analogy.
won't.
Right.
But you're paying them to not do it, so it's fine. Right?
That's an interesting way to look at it. That's very eye-opening for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of thing that they're kind of hiding behind. And did you know that the term carbon footprint was popularized by BP Oil?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I think that says a lot about the whole idea, and I don't think that's where the focus should be. I think it should be in doing less like harm from the beginning, and like actually making big changes, and not just trying to like net zero just means that you're just still doing everything the same. Net zero is still like it's carbon compensating. So you're just like giving some money to something,
right,
while still doing the same harm, which is, like less than the bare minimum of what you should be doing. So yeah.
Let's push for real changes,
Yes.
and not just money going diverted on the back end after the profits are made. Yeah, good point. Very true. Do you see circular packaging being a good solution?
I think in some cases I've seen some interesting things. Circle Up, Upcircle is a beauty brand that they have like ceramic jars that they're using, and they take them in, and they have ovens where they get heated to be sterilized, and then they use them again. And I think that kind of thing is amazing. I think one thing that people bring up a lot with that is that, oh, it's not scalable though. You can't scale it. You can't like make it like, and the thing that I think about there is that instead of thinking about making it scalable, it's reproducible. You can have more brands that are doing this.
Right.
And have brands that are niche and that can be local, even like that are selling to more of a local market. And then it's also much easier to be able to take things back and just have more and more brands that can then innovate and come up with more new ideas. And I think that is the future, and that is what I want to work for in the industry.
I like that idea a lot, and maybe even that cleaning process or that disinfecting process could be centralized locally, because I think if we start shipping this stuff all over the world, it negates the effort. I'm hoping we can come up with a system where you buy it, you bring it back locally.
Yeah, I think that would be really, really good. I mean, one thing that we can look at is to the past, where Coca-Cola used to use glass bottles that they took in and washed and used again. Why can't we do that?
Right. We can, and that's the beauty of it. I'm excited to watch it happen. I think we will see more and more of the glass recycling, reusing, and different alternative materials like that coming back into fashion. It's exciting.
Yeah, I also think like having more very, very simple packaging that's just for sending it like as a refill, and then you can use the same glass jar or use a glass jar that you already own.
Right.
I think that kind of thing is really good. And I know that like it usually ends up being a plastic pouch that you use, and that those aren't always recyclable. But I think the thing that's important to consider is that most plastic doesn't get recycled. It's about 9% of the plastic that has ever been produced that has been recycled. So decreasing the amount we use, I think, is also really important. And the fact is that these plastic pouches use very, very little plastic compared to most other options.
That's a great point. And sometimes using more easily recycled material would take so much more material to ship the same item, and it would take so much more space up in the truck or whatever the case may be, that it makes more sense to do a really thin mailer bag. But those mailer bags can be reused over and over again, and I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about them. Don't throw them away, cut them open and use them again. Use them when you ship out stuff to your friends, or find a place to bulk recycle them.
Yeah, and I think like anybody who like ships out anything, if you have a hobby, you have an Etsy store, if you anything you get when you order stuff, use that for when you're shipping stuff out and use it again. Personally, I have several pet rodents, and they have a lot of fun with cardboard, and it ends up being something for them. And yeah, it's just shredded up by the end, so it can build stuff for my pet rodents and make toys for them. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Another use of packaging, right?
Yeah.
That's a reuse or a recycle right there for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you know, that's why it's also nice to not have so much plastic involved in everything, because anything with plastic is, I don't know, like I don't want to have that close to my pets. You can't burn it because burning plastic is really bad. Some people might think, oh, can't we incinerate plastic? But that's actually the worst thing we can do with plastic, because it releases so much toxic greenhouse gases. And, you know, it's fossil fuels. And I don't want that like everywhere. I don't want it to be broken down and in the water system and in the ocean and in the food we eat.
Right.
And it just actually gets literally everywhere. And I think we really need to do something about it, because I think it's a big part of like actually addressing climate change. So yeah, it's important to do something and do it now.
It'd be better to recycle that plastic. I agree. And reuse it over and over again. Or like you said, not use it in the first place if you don't have to.
Yeah.
Let me ask your opinion on something else. A lot of people in our circle talk about biodegradable packaging. What are your thoughts on biodegradable packaging?
I mean, if I'm thinking about biodegradable packaging, the thing that I think about is paper. But I know that's not what most people are bringing up. They're talking about biodegradable plastic, which is, it almost feels like an oxymoron, because it isn't, right? Like, you know, it's actually not, even in the best kind of case. It actually gets to where it's supposed to be, which is not a regular compost. It's industrial compost, which is very different. And I feel like even calling it that is misleading for consumers, because I think a lot of consumers imagine you put it in a pile and it just kind of disappears, right?
Right.
And that's just not it, right?
Often people speak of, oh, you just put it in your backyard garden and it'll biodegrade in the garden. And I just don't know people that would want to put a plastic bag or plastic packaging into future food for themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really big problem with that, because it gets into the soil. And remember, again, plastic is fossil fuels, and you want to put fossil fuels in your food. And I don't think so. That's why having paper, there's lots of brands, deodorant especially, it's a space where paper packaging has become much more popular, and they kind of showcase video loops of their packaging in the composting just there in a regular home compost. And I think that's great. So if people actually want biodegradable, find a way to put it in a paper packaging, because, then that could be a true claim.
Yeah, there are some plastics that are bio-based, like corn-based, and there's some
Sugar cane is the other one.
Yeah, sugar cane. I've heard lots of negative things about both of those, but I would love to learn more if there are positives to those. Seems like we should be using the farmland to feed our people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And I've talked to some people about that too. And once it's been turned into plastic, it is plastic. It is plastic just the same as any other plastic, and it has just the same issues. The only difference is the source. And I know that there are also some ethical concerns with how sugarcane is being farmed in a lot of places, and kind of the working conditions. So it's not really a green option, because it's basically just that they turn these crops into oil, and then the oil gets turned into plastic the same way that the fossil fuels will be turned into plastic, which is overall also a really toxic process. And there's a lot of issues with that. I know there are some areas in the States where there's a lot more frequency of cancer and other issues around these plastic factories.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of the off-gassing and that new car smell is actually very toxic off-gassing. This is the kind of thing we need to know as consumers, I think, be aware of.
Yeah, and I think like that's something you notice. Even I'm very much of a, like, I've always been like a creative type, and I do a lot of like arts and crafts type stuff. I like to kind of make stuff with my hands. Like
Yeah.
now for my work, I print out and I'll fold the boxes, like prototypes of the packaging I'm doing. But I've done stuff before where it's like melted plastic for something, and it's like, oh, I can tell that this is a bad idea already. And I used to also do resin, like a two-part resin that I mixed and made jewelry into jewelry. And it's like, yeah, you should wear a mask, and you really need to wear gloves, because you don't want to get it on your fingers, on your skin, because it's toxic. It is like, you don't want it. Like if it melts, it's actually toxic, and it can be like make a long-term harm if you're being exposed to it a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of dangers in those epoxies and other things that people need to know about. Yeah, great point. Are you seeing the brands that you're working on or working with being open to more sustainable options? Or do they come to you because your knowledge of that process?
I think when I've also spoken to a lot of different brand founders in Clubhouse, there's a lot of kind of rooms around that. And I think there's, especially with the independent brands, there's a lot of brands that are looking for more sustainable options. A lot of them kind of feel lost and like, okay, but whatever I do, it seems like it's not good. And I think there's a lot of kind of misinformation out there about what options are good. Like, I think the plastics industry puts out a lot of negative things about how much energy it takes to make glass and aluminum packaging. And I think it's really frustrating for a lot of people when it's so hard to figure out what is actually sustainable that they can do. And they keep getting misled by different kind of options, like the bioplastics or the biodegradable plastics, and all kinds of different things like that. But I think there's a really strong will, and there is also a really strong demand for it. And I think the demand is increasing, and I think it's going to continue to increase more and more and more. There's a really, really big demand for sustainable options, and for that's a whole other bag of worms. But like the clean beauty kind of space also cares a lot about sustainable packaging. The clean part is also has to do with like fear mongering about certain common ingredients in beauty, where it's a bit like, okay, so we don't use these ones, these are bad ones, don't buy products with that, buy our products. And all the brands kind of have different things that they don't use, and there's some kind of issues in the industry with that. But I feel like that whole market is growing, and I think that market especially does care about sustainability also. So there are there are a lot of positives to it too. And yeah, I mean, also with the more and more of the effects of climate change showing, I feel like that's going to really, really amplify the demand for more sustainable options.
Yes, I agree 100%. We're seeing it already, you know, record temperatures, the craziest weather I've ever seen in my life all over the world. It's incredible. So hoping this sparks changes like this and gets people to use the right kinds of packaging.
Yeah.
So we
just
keep spreading this message.
we just have to also make sure that we don't let businesses get away with greenwashing.
Yes.
Because I think that's a big part of the problem with people being misled. I don't think the problem is that people need to be educated to want to buy sustainable. I think people inherently do care.
Yeah.
Even people who don't, you know, some people who still don't really get the whole climate change thing, they still can be concerned about plastics and the issues of, you know, landfills filling up with more and more waste. So I think people inherently do care and want to do their part, but you have to make it possible for them and stop lying to consumers, and, you know, be honest.
That's it. That's the point of all of this, is exactly what you said. Tell them the truth and let them make the decision that they want to make for themselves. Yes. Well said, Jennifer. That's it. And awesome.
I think that's actually something I tell people who are more in the independent beauty space. For me, myself, I want to help beauty brands get loved by people that do care and take market share away from the big corporations, which is something I care a lot about. I am no interest in working with brands owned by these big corporations. And the thing that they have that the corporations can't kind of copy and steal and mimic is the transparency and being honest about what you're actually doing and while you're doing good. This is something that the corporations can't do because they're not doing the work. If they're being honest, they're actually not doing as good as they try to make it seem. So I think that's something that independent brands should really think about, and just being transparent about what they're doing.
And the independent brands will be able to shift faster towards sustainable options and more easily. You know, it's easier to buy 20,000 of something when you don't have a million of the old kinds of packaging in your warehouse. So yeah, great point. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Jennifer?
I have my website, mintoero.com, where you can find me on all my other socials. You can also, you know, add me on LinkedIn or message me on Instagram. Those I usually check pretty regularly. And yeah, it's just really nice connecting with other people in the industry that really do care about sustainability. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who can share any sustainable options out there. I try to really learn about it so that I can actually help the brands I work with make the best choices they can that make sense for their business. So if anybody's out there, would be happy to connect with people just to learn more about the kind of options they have.
Well, and you've been such a huge value to our clubhouse rooms, and we've sure learned a lot from you. And so I can definitely tell the brands that are interested in working with you that you would do an amazing job and are a wealth of knowledge. So thank you again. Yeah,
thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, Landsberg Aurora, for your support. And thank you again, Jennifer Carlsson. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.